Howdy, welcome back to welcome back. Welcome back to the channel content. This is content on the channel, thus it is channel content. Jesus, okay, well that came from somewhere. I'm going to be talking about forms of government. Unlike my last video, Jair Bolsonaro, I'm not going to be using a script because I'm going to be using a PowerPoint because I am too autistic to be able to really, edit together. Sorry, that was rude. There's nothing wrong with autism. But I have it. Smooth recovery, I know. Alright, so let's first start with absolute monarchy. Now, this is an absolute mess, speaking of absolutes, because there is an incredible, big shocker here. There's an incredible amount of overlap in various forms of government. I'll give you a quick example. You got democratic republic, you got constitutional republic, constitutional democracy, and then you got a democratic constitutional republic, you got national republic. It's a big mess. I'd say we jump over that. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I don't know how. So I guess I might just be reading. So essentially, an absolute monarchy is a dictatorship, but the leader is called a king or a queen, and normally there's some sort of divine motivation, or no, not divine motivation necessarily, but divine justification. Like they're appointed by God, so they get absolute power. This was sort of common before, mainly in the medieval age, and it lasted really until World War One. But that was about the time when pretty much every monarchy, every real, true, proper monarchy, where a monarch had power, really died off. And now all you have is a bunch of parliamentary monarchies where you got some monarchs for ceremonial purposes, but the actual the actual country is governed by the prime minister and parliament. So now you got an authoritarian country. Now, essentially, authoritarian country is a form of government in which the state imposes itself into the lives of people. Now, this is sort of in contrast, but also sort of is a totalitarian country. We'll cover the differences then. But basically, an authoritarian country, it sort of imposes itself into the lives of its citizens and tries to keep them in line. This has been incredibly common throughout history. Examples include totalitarianism, fascism, communism, and absolute monarchy. Authoritarian governments are normally also dictatorships. Sometimes they can be oligarchies. And, all it has to do to be an authoritarian country is the government has to impose itself into the lives of its people. Meaning that a dictatorship and a monarchy are easily authoritarian because it almost entails dictatorship doesn't necessarily entail imposing the government, imposing your will into the lives of the people, but it does because with absolute power comes absolute ability to potentially abuse that power. Now, Commonwealth, this is a fun one. Essentially, it's a group of independent states united for a sort of common good. And if you may not know this, but the U.S. has, I think, 2 or 3 Commonwealths. Forgive me for not knowing all of them. I believe one is American Samoa, and that is more or less, I believe, an undeveloped island nation, which is essentially a territory where we just sort of study natives. I'm not 100% on that, though, so don't take my word for it. But Puerto Rico is a more common of what a Commonwealth is, because Puerto Rico is just a kind of a country that exists, and it has pretty much the absolute protection and support of the United States, and a lot of its citizens are automatically citizens of the United States, and the National Guard and all sorts of U.S. organizations operate in Puerto Rico, meaning they get pretty much all the benefits of a state of the United States, but they have a bit more sovereignty in deciding their politics. So now you got communism. This is one of my favorite forms of government. It's a system of government in which the government controls the economy, the means of production, namely. Typically, it mixes elements of other governments because communism, at its core, is more of an economic system. But of course, you have to have an incredibly strong central government that's able to impose its will into the lives of the people, because otherwise you can't really control the means of production. At least not to the degree to which communism needs to in order to be communism. So it may be some form of republic, People's Republic of China, for example, where where you have one big parliament that's all one party, so you can vote, and you can even vote for your president, but whoever you vote for is a member of the Communist Party, so nothing changes. It can also be some form of democracy. It can be a dictatorship. It could even be a proper republic. Examples include the Soviet Union and Communist China, and North Korea. That's a good one. North Korea is a very special kind of communism. It's like communism on steroids. Now you have Confederation. It's a group of states brought together by a compact treaty to create a central form of government. Examples include the Confederate States of America. You remember those good old boys fighting for states' rights and slavery and all that fun stuff. And then you got the United States, which was essentially the United States was a confederation before it was the United States. Essentially, before the Constitution, the U.S. was a confederation. The problem with that, I'll start. The motivator of the United States being a confederation was because, of course, people were scared of the government having too much power. So it's only reasonable to expect that they're going to create one of the least powerful central governments you can have, which is a confederation. Essentially meaning that taxes are optional. So the government it can run a military, it can have a military, or it could, but it can't finance that military or itself. So that had to change. The Confederation is normally a temporary state of government. It's been sort of common throughout history. You got the Iroquois Confederation, which was a coalition of Native American tribes in North America. They were around for a while, but, America beat them and genocided them a little bit, a touch of genocide. Constitutional. Now, this is one of the fun forms of government where it actually necessitates elements from any other form of government in order to exist, because a constitutional government is just a government that has a constitution. And now here's where a lot of the problems with the overlap comes, because there's a lot of things, like you have a democratic republic, a representative democracy, all sorts of weird things, and they can be constitutional. So you could say it's a constitutional republic, but it would also be a democratic republic, and then full it'd be a democratic constitutional. It's a mess. So a constitutional government, it's essentially a government with a constitution. It overlaps with, it could overlap with a monarchy, republic, democracy, make it in a constitutional republic, a constitutional monarchy, and a constitutional democracy. You also have, hold on, gotta use all these. Got a constitutional monarchy. On the topic of constitutional governments, here is a constitutional monarchy. The UK is a constitutional monarchy, or at least it was. Now it's a parliamentary monarchy, meaning it used to be the monarch was limited by a constitution, and now the monarch doesn't have any political power, and instead it has a constitution and a parliament which actually governs the country. So that's always fun. Now, let's move on. Now, this is a good one too. Democracy. Democracy has been around for God knows how long. God knows how long. Democracy has been around, we know for sure, since the days of Greece. And because Greece was a democracy of sorts, mostly. Sparta was real weird. It was sort of authoritarian, had a sort of warrior culture where at the age of 7 you're drafted into the military basically for training. And then once you actually were military age, you were an unkillable warrior, and so Spartans had a quite proper reputation as the ultimate warrior society because their society was based entirely around the war and military. But, they had serfs and all that to fill in the gaps. Anyways, off topic. Democracy is a system in which citizens hold the supreme power. Often their actual will is... Now, this is a weird thing because this is where a democracy becomes a republic. Their will is often enacted through elected representatives who are held accountable through elections. So true democracy is... I'm pretty sure there are no true democracies anymore, but there's a lot of representative democracies, i.e. democratic republics. That's the overlap. Democracies and republics. Democracy and republic as systems of government are probably one of the most common overlaps. In Europe, you still have a lot of more parliamentary governments. So the parliament has more power than the people. I believe in a lot of situations, I'm not 100% on this though. I haven't looked into Europe too much. But in essence, the parliament appoints the prime minister based on the will of the people. So the people don't elect their leader, the leader who has the most power. They elect the people who elect the leader. It's just it's a mess. Now, here's the thing. This doesn't even like scratch the surface of potential government. And here's dictatorship. I forgot what that movie was called. Please kill me, but I did watch it, so you know I enjoy classical movies. And actually, it was pretty good. And they had the speech at the end. Anyway, a system in which a single ruler or a group of people, or yeah, here's a weird thing: oligarchy. A dictatorship can be an oligarchy. It can even be a republic. If one person is given ultimate power, so long as they have ultimate power, no matter how they attained it, whether it be through elections or votes by parliament or an oligarchy, a dictatorship also overlaps. Fascism fascism absolutely does necessitate a dictatorship. Communism normally necessitates a dictatorship. Essentially, one person, absolute power. That's all you have to remember. Now let's move on. Now here's a fun one. Ecclesiastical. This overlaps with practically every other form of government, because all you have to do to have an ecclesiastical government is you have to have a government in which the church has power. In this case, as I described, the church has the most power. But you could take, for example, an Islamic republic or an Islamic monarchy in which, in theory, the church or the theocracy, a certain religion actually controls the government, or at least has a major say in the government, or they appoint a leader who represents the religion. It's a mess. You could even say that a lot of monarchies, especially in medieval Europe, are ecclesiastical. Okay, we're done with that. That hurts my head. Emirate. It's a type of monarchy in which the monarch rules by Islamic values. That's basically it. Darn you, Islam, and your new forms of government, which are really just other forms of government, but with a special name. Federation is a system of government in which power is divided between a series of states, provinces, territories, etc. And normally it's also runs in combination with a constitutional system, parliament, and you can even have a dictatorship, which is a federation. You could even argue that the U.S. is a federation because of how we have states, and how states have a certain level of autonomy. Is the U.S. a federation, you may ask? I'm going to say that is a solid, I really don't know. So, yeah, the United States is in a certain sense a federation, but it's also a republic, it's also a democratic republic, and it's also a huge mess because every government is practically unique. An Islamic republic, it is a form of Islamic theocracy, which is also a republic. Normally, these types of countries will have a parliament, and maybe they'll allow other parties. In some cases, they actually will have other parties that are able to legitimately attain power. But essentially, it's a religious republic, and normally there's going to be some sort of theocratic party that represents a religious group or the various denominations of religion. In this case, Islam. So that's fun, I know. Marxism. Yeah, this is a good one because Marxism is communism, but not really. It's actually the sort of parent ideology to communism. Communism evolved from Marxism. It was a new ideology created at the basis of Marxism. And essentially, it's a Mormon ideology, honestly. As the ism would suggest. The goal of ending capitalist oppression of workers via revolution and then abolishing the state while still having collectivized means of production to allow people to work the least amount possible. Variants include Maoism, a state in which the state must maintain constant revolution, stay in touch with the people. That is a theory developed from Marxism. It's also a form of communism, Marxist-Leninism, a communist system that prioritizes aiding undeveloped states to prevent imperialism. That sounds really nice, but the sad reality is that it probably will never work. Now, this is a beautiful, beautiful picture right here. A system in which the president operates separately from all other levels of government, meaning essentially a presidential system is a system in which someone with who is called the president has absolute power and in turn is not held accountable. So normally, I believe a good example, I'm not sure about this, but the Democratic Republic of Congo, a lot of African countries actually, where the president has a limited term of like 6 years or something like that, and they'll be elected, but after they're elected, they have absolute power. So, then they become a dictator or whatever else they want, and they probably have the actual ability to just turn the government into a right and proper dictatorship. And it also could be argued that the U.S. is a presidential system because ultimately the federal government has power over all other branches of the government. Anyways, republic. This one intermingles with tons of other governments. You got the Islamic Republic earlier. You can have a generally ecclesiastical republic, constitutional republic, democratic republic. It's a system in which the will of the people is enacted through elected officials, whom are held accountable through elections. And essentially, their idea is that they represent the people. This is my personal favorite, I guess, because it's the kind of country I'm in. A bit of bias there, but keep in mind, federal republic. A government in which the federal government has the most power, meaning they aren't immediately held accountable for actions. Now, that can be a bad thing, and I don't know, something like the CIA going around and experimenting on people, giving them syphilis. Or it can be a good thing, like the 308th, is that, what was it, 308 Airborne being deployed to enforce integration of a school, high school was it? I don't know. But that's the idea. Federal republic means the federal government has ultimate power, so they can sort of ignore the will of the people, but they will be held accountable eventually, hopefully. Sometimes that's not how it works. Anyway, socialism, it's a system in which the means of production are ultimately controlled by the state in order to more equitably distribute resources to allow for a heavily taxed free market. This doesn't necessarily even have a free market. It could be a big, big mess. But socialism will normally entail things like global health care, strong welfare system, and that is that's established with the goal of, well, basically making it to where everyone can at least survive. So if there's a massive economic crash, or if there's a big issue in, say, population differences, like there's not enough young people coming in to replace the old people, then socialism is a bit of a mess. And also, socialism very easily transitions into communism, because in essence, socialism is just communism with extra steps. The only difference is things aren't directly distributed by the government. They're taken from you and then distributed. Well, actually, they're taken. 50% of things are taken from you and then distributed by the government. Because I believe socialism also entails a tax rate of roughly 50%. Now, this is my favorite part of the video, because I looked at the definition of an anarchy, and I forgot the site. If I remember it, I'll leave a link, but I highly doubt I will. I might have some links in it. No, I don't. We'll find out. Anarchy is an absolute mess, because there's a lot of as the grand evolution of civilization, a lot of new ideas and a lot of old ideas are being explored, and one of the most popular ideas to explore these days is anarchy, because no one likes the government. So hey, I don't like the government, let's get rid of it entirely. But then here's where it becomes confusing, because people create their own independent, unique forms of anarchism. And I guess we'll cover this in about, I don't know, in real life it'll be 2 hours, because I'm going to leave. But I'll be back, and I'll record the rest of this video. Avidad. And unavidad. What bought this be? I'm back in action. Alright. Sorry, we're on anarchy, right? Yeah, get out of here, socialism. Alright. So anarchy is essentially the state of non-government. It is a situation in which there is no government over a certain area. Anarchy is probably one of the most common forms of government throughout history, because it is the lack of government. And in recent years, the naivete, pardon my French, that's not how you use that, but essentially there's a lot of people who've sort of adapted anarchy and anarchism into a legitimate form of government, as in they would like to transition peacefully into a state of anarchy, which is not normally how that works, and I highly doubt that will ever work, especially if it is a situation in which you are operating within one country, and basically there are other countries who would very, very happily grab this now ungoverned territory. No matter how much you want to say that, oh, but militias and guerrilla warriors, well, yes, you can hold out for a good long while, but with enough persistence and with enough proper central government operations, you probably won't hold out forever. But ultimately, your biggest threat is someone starting a new government in your area. Like someone who starts a settlement of a bunch of people who don't have anything and say, hey guys, let's share what we have, and then once we can afford to, then we can start trading for things and being more fair about it. Anyway, so let's start off with mutualism. It is a form of anarchism in which a mixed economy of shared resources and independent production takes place. This form of anarchism was occasionally present in history, especially in growing settlements that were gradually transitioning into early capitalism, thanks to the increased size of population and in turn the creation of different classes. Yeah, basically, mutualism is a more feasible state of anarchy, which is a weird thing to say because, well, in this context it is, because a state of anarchy normally has been, following the collapse of government before the creation and institution of a new government. But, sort of mutualism is the type of government that a settlement would have before there's any real structure. Social anarchism is completely impossible. Well, not completely impossible, but it is heavily infeasible. Essentially, it's socialism, but also anarchism. So it's the voluntary sharing of resources. This was common in early settlements in the United States. You are not the United States, God no, but in colonies. The early settlements in the Americas, British settlements at least, there was a sort of form of social anarchism where there was no real government and everything was shared because no one had money or anything like that. But of course, the settlements were really struggling back then because everything was shared equally, and there was a whole issue of who really deserves to get food and who needs more food and all that. But ultimately, the problem with both socialism and social anarchism is that people need different things. I'm a pretty thick boy, so I need more food. Joking aside, tall people and perhaps even tall people and more muscular people will need more sustenance. They will need more food than, say, a really short and thin. What was the term I'm looking for? And people who are short and have a very small frame, they would need very little food relative to like a 6 foot tall, muscled up giant. So in essence, socialism doesn't really work out, and social anarchism doesn't really work out because people have different needs and different preferences and are, of course, individuals. Anarcho-communism, a form of government... Oh, that wasn't even intentional, but that's hilarious. But it basically is a form of non-government, I should say, in which the state and currency are abolished. Essentially, this is what Marxism wanted to be. It's what Marxism strived to be, but never really became. And the means of production are collectivized voluntarily, of course. Historically, this has ironically been a transitional period between communist revolution, between a communist revolution and the formation of a communist state. That is quite ironic, me. Anarcho-collectivism. It's, oh my god, I forgot all of these. An end to the state and private ownership. Essentially, this system This is a system in which one is compensated for labor via resources. This was an occasional system that formed in early settlements prior to the emergence of classism. Essentially, this is anarcho-socialism, but it was more. But this is a sort of more, precise version of anarcho-socialism, where people are indeed rewarded based on their merits, but instead of receiving money, it was. In old forms, it could be said, proto-anarcho-collectivism. It would be a situation in which people were actually compensated on their merits. Instead of money, they were given resources in accordance to how much they worked. So someone who works 12 hours a day would get a fair amount of food and maybe wood or whatever else they needed, compared to someone who worked like an hour a day. So syndicalism. Syndicate. That's basically, it's a syndicate. It's an anarchist syndicate. Essentially, it's the end of a state and private ownership. The key part of this variant is the democratization of production, meaning workers decide what to produce. So it's a free market, yeah. It's a good way of saying it's a free market without that pesky freedom. Imagine you're born into this nice little community, and everyone votes on everything that's produced. Instead of like a system where you would support something by, say, buying it or by, I don't know, donating money to it if it's some sort of project or charity you enjoy. Instead, everyone just votes and majority rule. If the majority of people want a brand new pool, but you are one of the few not idiots who says, okay, maybe we should focus more on producing food because the food stockpile, the grain stockpile, is very close to empty. They're like, no, we all want a pool, and you just want... Basically, it's the corruption, it's the stupidity and corruption of communism and socialism, where too many resources are pulled in the wrong direction, and the needs of perhaps the majority are sometimes undermined. Well, actually, no. I shouldn't make an argument for this, because I don't have one, basically. It's stupid, because the democratization of labor, the same problem with the system of democracy. With majority rule, the individual is heavily left out. Imagine, the car scenario kind of works. But I guess more realistically, if you wanted something reasonable versus you wanted something not reasonable. Not more realistically, more generally. If you wanted to focus on building houses instead of expanding farmland, even though expanding farmland is a reasonable thing to do, but you said, we might need more shelter. It sort of undermines the needs of the individual, which are supported in capitalism because the individual can work for and then invest in things that they want. Anyways, green anarchism. It's stupid. It is the end of It is the end of the state and all forms of civilization, as well as the neglect of technology. And like anarcho-syndicalism, it has never actually occurred. This one is stupid. But I suppose if you were able to convince the entire world to go the way of green anarchism, we could. But humanity would inevitably die along with the Earth. But hey, you know what? Maybe that's for the best. Because the fact that humanity created all of this nonsense is a sign that perhaps we don't really deserve to exist anymore. Anarcha-feminism. They got that nice little A going on at the end of it. Instead of that's masculine. In the language of Spanish, A is a feminine letter, and O is a masculine letter. You got Chico, that's boy, and you got Chica, that's girl. Yeah, fun little language lesson. Essentially, it's anarchism, but there's no aggression or masculinity of any sort. This has never occurred, and this will never occur, for the simple fact that, whatever you classify as masculinity, and especially anything classified as aggression, those are two very generic things that will inevitably occur. You could pump an ungodly amount of soy into everyone's system, or more realistically, some sort of estrogen into everyone, and perhaps that would reduce aggression, but you're never going to get rid of aggression. Especially not if you count something like, passive aggression, like being passive aggressive, like arguments and disagreements and things like that. Essentially, like a lot of these forms of anarchism, it's never going to happen because it's so thoroughly utopian and has such a impossible and infeasible goal that it is virtually impossible. But hey, if you could do it, I'd be really impressed. Oh my god. Okay. Anarcho-pacifism. It's a variant of anarchism in which weaponry and violence is only used in defense of anarchism. This has never actually happened. It will likely never happen. Because no one, mainly not because you couldn't do it, but because no one has ever defended anarchy. People have fought for it, ironically, but they've never defended it. Anarcho-queer. It is literally anarcho-socialism but gay. If I remember the definition on the site, it actually is that. It is anarcho-socialism, but for gay people. Fortunately, however, anyone who is stupid enough to support the system would also have to be gay, meaning it would only last a generation. Of course, that's when you don't account for immigration. And I highly doubt that an anarcho-queer territory, I guess, a region, I don't know what you would call an area of anarchy, maybe just that, an area of anarchy, would get too many immigrants. And if they weren't straight, I mean, you're not going to last too long. Anarchism without adjectives. The uniting ideology of anarchism. Like the good old-fashioned anarchists. People just fighting to get rid of the government and let people do whatever they want. Essentially, that's actually what this is. It is anarchism, which would allow anyone to pursue their own form of anarchism This would be a sort of movement which would be a joint pursuit of anarchism, meaning it's not actually a sort of anarchic system like all these other ones. And it's weird saying an anarchic system because there is no such thing. I mean, by definition of anarchy, which is a lack of government, thus a lack of a system. God, I got stops hurting my head. Anarcho-capitalism. I kind of enjoy the idea of anarcho-capitalism, but I also don't. It's essentially anarchism, but there's a free market, just like in actual anarchy. There is a free market. Problem is, it is incredibly free. It worked pretty well in early human history. In the future, it will likely serve as a transitional system prior to the emergence of a new state, just like regular anarchism. I don't know why. Anyways, anarcho-capitalism is essentially the idea that capitalism will solve all your problems. Not actually. That's not actually the idea. It's a little bit more grounded in reality than that. But at its core, there are a lot of problems. It's the same sort of problem with anarchism. People can just attain a lot of power, especially in the case of anarcho-capitalism when there's a lot of a focus on business. Imagine if Disney was allowed to do basically whatever they wanted. So they could kill people for making some sort of cheap knockoff of Mickey Mouse. They could create a security organization, or they could just hire people to go out and kill other people. Imagine McDonald's going to war with Disney, but they actually had guns and helicopters and such. That's basically anarcho-capitalism. But also, you got a nice little bit of oppression. People could be coerced into pain, and it would still count as anarcho-capitalism. Anyway, religious anarchism. It's anarcho-socialism, but with a greater religious motivation. This works with any religion to my knowledge, I think. At least that's how it goes. So you can have anarcho-Christianism, which is, I guess, you abide the ideals of Christianity and the tenets of that religion, or any religion, and the tenets of any religion, and just you have anarchy. So there's no state, no way to enforce it. It's just, I guess, expected that everyone would abide this. I guess this has kind of happened maybe in some circumstances, but I highly doubt it. And also, this probably will never occur, except maybe in somewhere like the Middle East, where actually that could count. Like ISIS just kind of enforces religious law, but they don't really have law or a system. Yeah. Imagine everything is run by ISIS. I guess that's religious anarchism. Okay, good note to end on. All right, everyone, you have a nice night. I don't know what time it is. You have a nice morning. Go outside and smell the roses. Where do I get that